I'd been working as a performer with a company that I formed called Cutback Theatre in prisons and working with people with HIV and various other community-based work. And through that work I'd started working with a dance company in Sheffield called Side by Side. And after a couple of projects with them, I was doing some management for them and some administration, and I was performing for them, and I thought I could maybe do that for myself and my own work. So I formed Vincent Dance Theatre in 1994, and the first piece that I made was with Harry Thierker, who I had collaborated with in the prison project. And we worked in a way that I have worked since, which is that I set the conceptual framework for the work, and then I invite collaborators to make it with me. And at the time, both Harry and I were very interested in partnering, and we wanted to explore a man and a woman working physically together to look at Andrea Dworkin's take on sexual possession and pornography and the interrelationship between the genders. We made a piece called Intercourse, which was based on Andrea Dworkin's text of the same name, and it explored quite a violent portrayal, I suppose, of how men and women interact. And Dworkin's feminist, very extreme feminist take on sex is that all sex is rape, and that's what that book discusses, and I found that very interesting as a starting point. So conceptually, that's where Intercourse begun. Is all sexual possession, as she calls it, rape? So we made Intercourse in Sheffield, I think, at the Lead Mill in 1994, and Harry taught me a lot about partnering, because I'm not trained in dance, and I had been performing in very physical pieces of work, physical theatre as it was then called, and I'd been training a lot in trapeze actually and aerial work, but I'd also been preoccupied with working in the community with quite challenging groups. Anyway, Harry had trained at the Northern School of Contemporary Dance in Leeds, and he's a brilliant partner, and he taught me a lot about giving and taking weight and exchange between two bodies, and he's very mercurial in the way that he moves, or he was then. And so we played a lot and created a duet that had intense partnering material and then separate material where he explored his sexuality. And I remember him exploring that in some detail and writing about that. And actually, even then, I explored the relationship between having sex, which I was having quite a lot of at the time, and having a baby, which I wasn't interested in having at the time. And that is, of course, a thread that has come through my work to a very recent piece of work. So the separate moments were me sort of cradling a doll that represented a baby that I didn't have and maybe didn't want at that stage, and Harry exploring his gay sexuality, and yet the duet was a heterosexual exploration based on Dworkin's politics, which are very extreme. That I'm not a separatist, I'm a feminist, I'm not a separatist at all, and she sort of is actually. And I think I also looked at the Scum Manifesto at the time by Valerie Sonaris, I think. I can't remember the name. But there's a Scum Manifesto that talks about cutting up men. So I was looking at really extreme versions of feminism to sort of measure them against where I found myself. And I found myself in a very particular place because I'd been working with sex offenders a lot in prisons, and also with women who had been raped and sexually abused, and people with special needs who'd been sexually abused, actually, in my community, my life as a community practitioner. So I think I have quite a particularly wide view of the spectrum of sexual intercourse that happens and the abusive end. And I do have very strong feelings about pornography, and that isn't helping our society very much at all, and how that infects the male view of a female body. So I was exploring all of those themes in Intercourse, and it was a duet that had some punch actually, and I got thrown around quite a lot in one section to Stabat Mater, I think, which is a beautiful choral piece of work. So it's sort of semi-religious. I think we were alluding to how the body can become a pieta kind of image, a sort of half-dead thing. So Harry and I were looking for images that reflected the politics, that somehow described our confusions around our own relationship with sex and death. Apart from a middle period where Richard Loden designed the sets for the company, I have actually always designed the work. And for Intercourse there was a double bed where we both started off in it naked, and there was full frontal nudity, which we both were fine with at the time, and there was a screen behind the bed where quite ugly pornographic shots of vaginas and penises and stuff that I'd been researching were projected, which was quite extreme at the time, actually, looking back, that we were setting our real bodies on a stage against images of porn. And I suppose I was exploring how would I be viewed as a woman naked, as a dancer, as a naked performer, set against these cunt images, basically, of open legs and no pubes and sort of plastic version of women. And Harry, we also had images actually from a photographer friend, Paula Summerley, who worked with me quite a lot in the early years, of Harry's penis bandaged up, because at the time he was exploring what his sexuality as a gay man meant and how it's sort of banned in certain areas. So it was, I suppose, not even a metaphor, quite a literal portrayal of some of his internal challenges that he was facing. And actually it's worth saying that at the time, 94, there was a massive AIDS campaign going on, and there were, I don't know if you remember the gravestone campaign where it's like, don't die of AIDS, and for gay men that was a big issue, and actually for me as a woman who was sexually active it was also an issue, because I didn't necessarily want to get pregnant at the time, and I did want to have sex, but I didn't want to catch AIDS, and also I had catch AIDS. I didn't want to get HIV. So these images that we flashed up were alluding to the dangers of porn, and I suppose also in the back of my mind, because I had done a big project with people with HIV, living with HIV in Sheffield the year before, were looking at what it means to be sexually active actually, and what risks you're taking, and whether we can talk about that. So I was putting some of that on stage, and I think it's really difficult to talk about pornography actually, and I was sort of thrusting that into the consciousness of our stage performances and setting the live body against the captured image of bits of bodies. Porn really just doesn't capture the whole, it captures bits of your body, and as dancers you're super aware of the whole of your physical body. I was also on a trip at the time about, I wanted to lift Harry and be as strong and as equal as Harry physically, which I was actually at the time, and I felt like that juxtaposed what you see in porn, which is women laid open and men thrusting, and actually I wanted to turn that on its head and sort of, I wanted to do a bit of, not thrusting exactly, but supporting, holding, lifting, catching. And that happened in the next piece that I made. We've always had original soundtracks made for the work that I've made, and in the early years I was collaborating with Dean Honer, who has since gone on to have a sort of life as a music producer, and also was the all-seeing eye, who had a few popular hits in the early 2000s. And he composed a piece of work for Intercourse. I designed it, Harry and I moved in it, and it caused a bit of a stir as a first duet. So we announced ourselves quite strongly as Vincent Dance Theatre in 1994 and toured mostly Yorkshire, but even beyond as a first piece. The response to Intercourse was quite strong. I think we got noticed. I think the things that were noticed were the violence and aggression of it. I remember a promoter saying to me, "Why are you so angry?" And I think I was angry because I was trying to make sense of the politics that Dworkin was talking about. It didn't match mine, but I knew she was onto something around pornography and the interrelationship between the genders. And it was fierce physicality, I suppose, and of its time. There was a lot of physical theatre was quite crash and burny around in the 90s. I think what we took forward from Intercourse was a really strong collaboration and physical understanding between Harry and myself. And we wanted, I think, to make another duet that was as physical, if not more highly physical, but that maybe dug a bit deeper into our own experiences as a man and a woman, rather than playing out the politics of someone else's writing. And so we decided to make another duet. And what we took forward was a strong audience response to the work. I think the audience got immediately the intellectual layers behind the physicality, and that's something that's always driven my work, is there is an idea or some politics that I'm exploring that isn't just vacant choreography. And so what we took forward was a confidence around, okay, we can use dance or use movement to explore themes and issues, to make statements or to ask questions. And Harry and I worked really well together and had quite a laugh actually making this very dark material. And so we decided to make another piece. The same year, I think, or very early the next year, called Noli Me Tangere, which means, in Latin, means "don't touch me." So it's a continuation of those boundaries around physicality and what you're prepared to put up with and not. But also, because we'd delved quite deeply into our souls making Intercourse, we wanted to, in a way, make a more personalised duet, which was more about our own experiences.